January 17th, 1940, the North Sea. The water was black as oil, heaving under a sky choked with iron clouds. The wind howled across the surface, carrying with it the bitter salt of winter and the faint metallic tang of distant war. Beneath that turbulent surface, encased in steel and silence, the German submarine U-32 slipped through the depths like a predator stalking prey. Inside, the air was thick with diesel fumes, sweat, and the acidic smell of unwashed men pressed together in a tube of riveted iron. The only sounds were the rhythmic ping of the sonar, the low hum of the electric motors, and the shallow breathing of 42 souls suspended between the surface world and the abyss. Kapitänleutnant Hans Jenisch stood in the control room, his face pale in the red glow of the emergency lighting. His eyes were fixed on the depth gauge, watching the needle tremble as the boat descended deeper into the cold embrace of the sea. Outside, somewhere in the darkness above, British destroyers prowled with their listening devices, hunting for the telltale signature of a German U-boat. Jenisch had been at this for months now, threading the needle between glory and a steel coffin at the bottom of the ocean. He was good at it. His crew trusted him. But even the best commanders knew that the sea kept secrets, and sometimes those secrets rose up to meet you when you least expected them. The radio operator turned, his headset pressed tight against his ears. "Kapitän, I'm picking up something unusual. Hull sounds, large, moving slowly, bearing 270. Jenisch moved to the hydrophone station, listening through the spare headset. There it was, a deep, resonant groan of metal under strain, the slow churn of propellers pushing something massive through the water. Not a warship. The rhythm was wrong, too steady, too slow. A merchant vessel, perhaps, but something about it felt different, heavier. He could hear secondary sounds too, faint but distinct, creaks and groans that spoke of cargo shifting, of weight distributed unevenly throughout a hull. "Periscope depth," Jenisch ordered quietly. The U-boat rose like a ghost, angling upward through layers of temperature and pressure until the periscope broke the surface with barely a ripple. Jenisch pressed his eye to the lens, adjusting the magnification as he swept the horizon. Rain lashed the water, reducing visibility to a few hundred meters, but there, emerging from the gray curtain like a mirage, was a ship, a British freighter, running alone without escort, wallowing in the swells like a wounded animal. Her name was painted clearly on the bow, HMS Laurentic. Jenisch felt his pulse quicken, a lone merchant ship in hostile waters, no destroyer screen, no air cover. It was the kind of target every U-boat commander dreamed of. But something nagged at him. Why was she alone? Why so far north, away from the protected convoy lanes? He watched her for another minute, noting the way she sat low in the water, her draft indicating a full cargo hold. Whatever she was carrying, it was heavy. "Battle stations," Jenisch said softly. "Prepared tubes 1 and 2. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, each man sliding into his role like a piece of clockwork. The torpedo tubes were flooded, the outer doors opened with a dull clank that reverberated through the hull. Jenisch took one more look through the periscope, calculating distance, speed, angle of attack. The Laurentic plowed on, oblivious to the predator rising beneath her. "Fire 1. The U-boat shuddered as the first torpedo leapt from its tube, its compressed air charge propelling it forward into the dark water. Jenisch counted the seconds, his eye still pressed to the periscope. 20 seconds, 30, 40, and then the explosion was muted by the water and distance, but he saw the flash, saw the column of spray and smoke erupt from the Laurentic's starboard side, just aft of the bridge. The ship lurched violently, her bow lifting as the stern began to settle. Jenisch could see men scrambling on deck, tiny figures silhouetted against the flames that now licked at the superstructure. Lifeboats were being lowered, swinging wildly in the wind and rain. Fire 2! The second torpedo found its mark amidships, breaking the Laurentic's back. She began to list immediately, her cargo shifting with a groan that Yenish could hear even through the submarine's hull. Within minutes, she was going down, her stern already submerged, her bow rising at a steep angle as the cold North Sea rushed in to claim her. Men leapt from the deck, their screams lost in the wind, lifeboats capsized in the chaos. It was over in less than 10 minutes from first strike to final plunge. Yenish lowered the periscope and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Another enemy ship sent to the bottom, another blow struck against the British war effort. But then the radio operator spoke again, his voice uncertain. "Capitan, I'm still picking up sounds from the wreck site, metallic impacts, very distinct. It sounds like cargo breaking free and hitting the seabed." Yenish frowned. The Laurentic had gone down in approximately 120 meters of water, well within diving range for a determined salvage operation, though far too deep for his submarine. But the sounds the operator was describing were unusual. Normally, a sinking ship would settle quickly, its structure collapsing under pressure, debris spreading across the ocean floor in a chaotic scatter. But these sounds were different, sharp, precise, rhythmic, like something heavy and dense striking rock. What was she carrying? Yenish wondered aloud. The question would haunt him for the rest of the war, because the HMS Laurentic, as he would later discover through intelligence reports and post-war records, was not simply another merchant vessel carrying grain or steel. It was a treasure ship, a floating vault loaded with 3,211 gold bars, 43 tons of pure gold bullion worth millions of pounds sterling, destined for Canada to pay for American war materials and to shore up British credit in the desperate early days of the conflict. Each bar weighed approximately 28 pounds and was stamped with the seal of the Bank of England. It was a fortune beyond imagination, now scattered across the rocky seabed of the North Sea, buried beneath silt and wreckage and the bodies of drowned sailors. But Yenish didn't know this yet. None of the U-boat crew knew it. They slipped back beneath the waves, their mission accomplished, their log updated with another kill, and they moved on to hunt for new targets in the dark waters between Scotland and Norway. The war at sea in 1940 was a brutal, grinding affair of attrition and endurance. Germany's Kriegsmarine, vastly outnumbered by the Royal Navy, relied heavily on its U-boat fleet to strangle Britain's maritime lifelines. Every merchant ship sunk was a victory. Every convoy scattered was a strategic success. The U-boat crews saw themselves as modern knights, technological warriors fighting a clean war against enemy shipping, while the Luftwaffe and Wehrmacht did the dirty work on land. There was romance in it, a sense of adventure and honor that appealed to young German sailors raised on tales of naval glory and Bismarckian pride.
They expected to find cargo holds filled with grain from Canada, steel from America, wool from Australia, the mundane materials of war. They expected to face destroyers and corvettes, to engage in a deadly game of cat and mouse with enemy sub-hunters. They did not expect to discover that beneath the gray waters of the Atlantic and North Sea, beneath the prosaic surface of merchant shipping, there flowed rivers of gold, streams of wealth so vast that it defied comprehension. The Laurentic was not unique. Throughout the war, dozens of ships carrying gold, currency, securities, and other financial instruments crisscrossed the Atlantic, often with minimal protection, their cargoes known only to a handful of senior officials in London, Ottawa, and Washington. Britain was hemorrhaging wealth, liquidating centuries of accumulated treasure to pay for American aircraft, Canadian wheat, and the million other necessities of total war. The gold flowed westward, while the war materials flowed east, an exchange of metal for metal, each transaction a desperate gamble that the British economy could hold out longer than German military power. When U-boat crews did stumble upon these treasure ships through luck, accident, or intelligence, they were stunned. The Nazi propaganda machine had taught them that Britain was a decaying empire, a plutocratic regime hoarding wealth while its people starved. And here was evidence that seemed to confirm it. Millions of pounds in gold being smuggled out of the country under cover of darkness, hidden aboard nondescript freighters, spirited away to foreign banks while British soldiers died in France and British civilians endured rationing at home. But the reality was more complex and more desperate than propaganda could convey. Britain was not hoarding wealth, it was spending it, liquidating its reserves at a catastrophic rate to stay in the fight. Every gold bar shipped to America represented another squadron of fighters, another shipment of rifles, another month of survival. The British government was mortgaging the future to purchase the present, transforming stored value into kinetic power, hoping that American industry could produce weapons faster than German factories, that Canadian farms could grow food faster than U-boats could sink ships. The wreck of the Laurentic lay undisturbed for over a year, its cargo slowly settling into the sediment as currents and tides worked at the broken hull. The bodies of the crew drifted away or were consumed by the sea's scavengers. The gold remained, inert and patient, 43 tons of metal that men had died to protect and would die again to recover. In 1941, British salvage operations began. It was dangerous, difficult work, conducted under constant threat of German air attack and U-boat interdiction. Divers in primitive equipment descended into the cold darkness, working by feel in near-zero visibility, cutting through twisted metal with torches and hauling bars of gold to the surface one at a time. The project took years and cost more lives. By the war's end, most of the gold had been recovered, but not all. Some bars had slipped too deep into crevices or been buried under collapsed bulkheads. Some simply vanished, lost to the hungry sea. For the crew of U-32, the memory of the Laurentic would fade beneath the weight of subsequent missions, further sinkings, more enemy encounters. Jenisch would survive the war, his submarine eventually sunk by British destroyers in late 1940, though he escaped and spent the remainder of the conflict in a POW camp. In those long years of captivity, he would have time to reflect on his actions, on the ships he had sent to the bottom, and the men he had killed. He would learn about the Laurentic's cargo, about the fortune that had slipped through his fingers without his knowledge, and he would marvel at the strange arithmetic of war, how a single torpedo could destroy millions in currency, yet fail to make any measurable dent in Britain's ability to resist.
Other U-boat commanders were not so fortunate in their ignorance. U-110, captured intact by the Royal Navy in May 1941, yielded not only the Enigma machine that would help break German naval codes, but also documents revealing German intelligence on British gold shipments. U-559, sunk in the Mediterranean in 1942, had been tasked with intercepting a specific convoy believed to be carrying currency reserves to Egypt. The operation failed, but it demonstrated how high-value financial targets had become priorities for the Kriegsmarine, how the war at sea had evolved beyond simple tonnage warfare into something more strategic and more sinister. There was a peculiar irony in this underwater wealth, these submerged fortunes that neither side could easily access. Gold, that most ancient and universal symbol of value, reduced to ballast on the ocean floor, guarded not by armies, but by pressure and cold and darkness. The bars lay in their steel tomb like the treasure of some drowned civilization, a monument to human ambition and folly, rendered meaningless by the simple physics of the deep. For the German sailors who learned of these cargoes, the psychological impact was profound and disorienting. They had been taught that they were fighting a war of ideologies, that National Socialism represented a clean break from the corrupt materialism of the Western democracies. Yet here was evidence that those democracies possessed wealth beyond imagining, that even in their darkest hour, even with invasion threatening their shores, Britain could ship 43 tons of gold across hostile waters as though it were coal or timber. What kind of empire could afford such losses? What kind of economy could sustain such hemorrhaging of capital? The answer, though few German commanders grasped it at the time, was an economy backed not merely by stored wealth, but by productive capacity, by the ability to generate value through industry and innovation. Britain's gold reserves were vast, but they were finite. America's industrial output was theoretically unlimited, constrained only by raw materials, labor, and time. Every gold bar sent to America purchased not just weapons, but access to that productive capacity, bought time for factories to tool up, for shipyards to launch new vessels, for training camps to produce new soldiers. The gold was important, but it was only a catalyst, a medium of exchange that enabled the real transaction, the transformation of American potential into Allied power. This was the truth that the U-boat crews, prowling the dark waters with their diesel engines and their courage, could not see from their submerged perspective. They saw the ships, counted the tonnage, tallied the kills, and believed they were winning. They did not see the economic machinery grinding behind those convoys, the vast engine of American industry awakening from its depression slumber and turning its attention to war. They did not understand that every ship they sank was being replaced by 3 more, that every ton of cargo they sent to the bottom was being compensated for by 100 tons of new production. The gold bars themselves, those small rectangles of dense yellow metal, became in their own way symbols of this fundamental misunderstanding. To the Germans, they represented proof of British plutocracy, evidence of wealth hoarded by elites while common people suffered. To the British, they represented sacrifice, the liquidation of imperial treasure to purchase survival. To the Americans, they represented payment, fair exchange for goods and services rendered in Britain's hour of need. 3 different interpretations of the same object, 3 different understandings of value and worth and obligation. In the cold water of the North Sea, the gold bars lay immune to these interpretations. They did not rust or decay. They did not judge or discriminate. They simply waited, patient and eternal, for someone to retrieve them or for the sea to bury them forever beneath layers of sediment and time. Some were recovered, some remain there still, according to maritime historians, lost in the scattered debris field of the Laurentic and dozens of other wrecks, their exact locations uncertain, their recovery economically impractical given the costs and dangers involved. And perhaps that is fitting. Perhaps there is a kind of justice in the sea claiming its share, in wealth being removed from circulation and locked away in underwater vaults beyond any nation's reach. The gold beneath British waters and Dutch waters and French waters and Norwegian waters, all the seas where treasure ships went down during those dark years, represents a tithe paid to the ocean itself, compensation for the blood and oil and debris that the war poured into its depths. For Hans Jenisch and the other U-boat commanders who survived the war, the years that followed were ones of reckoning and reassessment. They had fought with skill and courage, had endured hardships that few could imagine, had believed themselves to be warriors in a noble cause. The discovery that they had been unwitting participants in something far more complex and morally ambiguous was difficult to reconcile. Some, like Jenisch, chose quiet lives after the war, avoiding publicity, refusing to glorify their actions. Others wrote memoirs, seeking to explain or justify their role in the conflict. Still others descended into bitterness and denial, unable or unwilling to confront the implications of their service. But the gold remained a constant in their memories, a physical reminder of the strange arithmetic of war. Those who had seen it, whether as bars salvaged from the deep or in captured documents and intelligence reports, could not forget its weight, its gleam, its absolute indifference to human striving. It was wealth in its purest form, abstracted from labor and production, valuable simply because humanity had agreed it was valuable. And yet, for all its value, it had not saved the ships that carried it, had not protected the men who died guarding it, had not altered the outcome of battles or campaigns in any direct, measurable way. The true wealth, the U-boat veterans came to understand, had not been in the gold at all. It had been in the factories of Detroit and Pittsburgh, in the shipyards of Glasgow and Halifax, in the training camps and research laboratories, where human ingenuity and determination were converted into military power. The gold was merely a catalyst, a medium of exchange. The real treasure was the system that the gold helped to lubricate, the vast machinery of democratic capitalism that could take raw materials and human effort and transform them into tanks and planes and ships faster than any authoritarian system could match. Today, the wreck of the Laurentic rests in approximately 120 meters of water off the coast of Northern Ireland. Her hull collapsed and scattered, her cargo mostly recovered but not forgotten. Divers occasionally visit the site, their lights cutting through the eternal darkness, their cameras capturing images of twisted steel and encrusted debris. No gold remains visible, but the site is protected as a war grave, a memorial to the men who died there in the cold waters of January 1940. Their names are recorded in naval archives, their sacrifice acknowledged in official histories, but the sea keeps them still, folded into its depths alongside the wreckage of the ship they served. The story of the Laurentic and ships like her, the gold ships, the treasure convoys, the underwater wealth of sunken wealth, is a story about value and what it means in times of total war. It is a story about how abstractions like currency and credit and financial reserves become suddenly violently concrete when transformed into weapons and strategies. It is a story about the limits of material wealth when confronted by human will and industrial capacity. And it is a story about discovery, about what happens when soldiers and sailors encounter evidence that challenges their understanding of the conflict they are engaged in. For the German crew of U-32, the moment they sent the Laurentic to the bottom was unremarkable at the time, just another successful attack, another entry in the war diary, another small victory in a long campaign. Only later, when they learned what the ship had carried, did the moment take on new significance, become something to puzzle over and remember. They had destroyed a fortune without knowing it, had sent millions of pounds to the seabed with a single torpedo, and it had made no difference at all to the outcome of the war. Britain had survived, had found new sources of wealth, had mortgaged its future to American creditors, and continued fighting.
What was hidden beneath British waters ultimately was not just gold. It was the desperate financial maneuvering of an empire in crisis, the frantic liquidation of centuries of accumulated capital to purchase a few more months of survival. It was the evidence of Britain's vulnerability and its resilience, its poverty and its wealth, existing simultaneously in paradox. It was the proof that the war was being fought not just with soldiers and weapons, but with ledgers and gold reserves and international credit arrangements, that the battlefield extended from the trenches of France to the banking houses of New York, from the skies over London to the ocean floor off Ireland. And in that cold, dark water, among the scattered gold bars and broken steel, there remains a truth that transcends the specifics of any single ship or battle. War consumes everything: wealth, lives, ideals, innocence, and the sea is the ultimate accountant, accepting all debts, refusing all appeals, keeping its records in rust and silt and bones.
The gold bars of the Laurentic are not treasure, they are receipts, invoices for a terrible transaction in which nations traded their futures for their survival and hoped the exchange rate would favor them in the end. For Britain, barely, it did. For Germany, it did not. And the gold remains beneath the waves, marking the place where those two futures intersected for a moment in January 1940, when a submarine crew discovered something hidden beneath British waters and failed to understand what it truly meant until long after the war had rendered the question academic and the answer irrelevant. The sea remembers what men forget, and in its depths it keeps the evidence of our follies and our courage, our greed and our sacrifice, locked away in steel and silence, waiting for no one, preserved for nothing, eternal and indifferent beneath the heaving surface of a world that moved on without ever fully learning the lessons written in those underwater archives of lost ships and sunken gold.